I'm Ryan, a 45-year-old trucker. I've been driving the highways for over 20 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing prepared me for what happened one night in New Mexico. It was a cold, quiet night, and I was driving through a remote stretch of highway in New Mexico. The road was empty, and I hadn't seen another car for miles. The only sound was the hum of my truck's engine and the occasional howl of the wind. It was just another long haul, or so I thought. As I rounded a bend, I saw a figure standing by the side of the road, waving frantically. It was a young woman, probably in her early 20s. She looked desperate, so I pulled over. I've always been wary of picking up hitchhikers, but something about her seemed urgent. "Hey, where are you heading?" I asked as she climbed into the cab. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm Olivia. I need to get to the next town." She looked pale and scared. I figured she must have been through something rough, so I didn't press her for details. We drove in silence for a while, the only light coming from my headlights cutting through the darkness. "Why are you out here alone?" I finally asked, trying to make conversation. She looked at me with wide eyes. "I had to get away," she whispered, "from everything." That answer didn't sit right with me, but I didn't push further. We continued down the road, and after a while, she seemed to relax a bit. We talked about random things, mostly her asking questions about my life as a trucker. "Do you always drive alone?" she asked, looking genuinely curious. "Yeah, it's just me and the open road," I replied. "Gets lonely sometimes, but it's peaceful." I glanced at her, expecting a response, but she was gone. My heart nearly stopped. The passenger seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes and pulled over, my mind racing. How could she just disappear? "Olivia," I called out, looking around the cab. There was no trace of her. I jumped out of the truck and searched the area with my flashlight, calling her name into the darkness. Nothing. She had vanished without a trace. I got back into the truck, my hands shaking. Was I losing my mind? Had I imagined the whole thing? I decided to keep driving, desperate to reach the next town and get some answers. I pulled into a small diner, hoping to clear my head. The place was nearly empty, just a few locals sipping their coffee. I sat at the counter, still shaken, and ordered a coffee. "Long night?" the waitress asked, noticing my distress. "You have no idea," I replied. I picked up a hitchhiker, and she just disappeared. The waitress's eyes widened. What did she look like? I described Olivia, and the waitress exchanged a look with the cook behind the counter. "You're not the first trucker to say that," she said, her voice low. "A girl matching that description has been missing for years. Folks around here say she haunts that stretch of road, looking for a ride." My blood ran cold. Was it possible? Had I picked up a ghost? I didn't know what to believe, but the fear in the waitress's eyes told me she believed it. I finished my coffee in silence, my mind spinning. As I got back on the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia's eyes were still watching me. I never saw her again, but every time I drive through New Mexico, I can't help but look for her on the side of the road, wondering if she'll appear again. If you're ever driving those lonely highways at night, be careful. You never know who or what you might pick up. I'm Mason, a 50-year-old long-haul trucker. I've been on the road for decades, hauling everything from furniture to frozen food. But nothing prepared me for the cargo I carried one night through the lonely highways of Nevada. I got the call from my dispatcher late in the afternoon. They needed me to pick up a sealed container and deliver it to a remote warehouse in Nevada. The instructions were clear. Don't open the container under any circumstances. It sounded strange, but I'd learned not to ask too many questions in this business. A job's a job. I picked up the container without any issues. It was large, heavy, and tightly sealed. As I started the long drive, everything seemed normal. The night was dark, the road was empty, and the miles rolled by. But about halfway through the trip, I started hearing noises coming from the trailer. At first, it was just a faint thump. I tried to ignore it, but it kept getting louder. Thump, thump, thump. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart racing. What could be making that noise? I called my employer. Hey, there's something weird going on with this load. I keep hearing noises from the trailer, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Do not open the container, Mason. Just keep driving and make the delivery. They replied curtly. Their response made my skin crawl. What were they hiding? I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity got the best of me. I grabbed a flashlight, got out of the cab, and went to the back of the truck. The noises had stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I found a small gap in the seal and peeked inside. My blood ran cold. Inside the container were crates filled with what looked like human remains. Bones, skulls, and other grisly fragments stared back at me. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. What had I gotten myself into? I called my employer again, my voice shaking. There are human remains in this container. What the hell is going on? Mason, it's a mistake. Just deliver the load and forget about it. They insisted. I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but fear took over. I got back in the truck and continued driving, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The rest of the drive was a blur. I was on autopilot, just trying to get the job done and get away from that container. I finally reached the warehouse, a rundown place in the middle of nowhere. I unloaded the container as quickly as I could, not looking at it any more than necessary. As I drove away, I felt a deep sense of unease that wouldn't go away. A few weeks later, I saw a news report about that same warehouse. It was under investigation for human trafficking. My heart sank. I realized what I had unknowingly transported, and it made me sick to my stomach. I had been part of something horrific. Since then, I've been haunted by that night. Every time I hear a strange noise or drive past a remote warehouse, I'm reminded of those crates and what they contained. It's a feeling I can't shake, no matter how hard I try. I'm Julian, a 40-year-old trucker. I've been driving these long hauls for over 20 years, but nothing in my experience prepared me for what happened one night in the Appalachian Mountains. It was a cold, foggy night, and I was driving through a remote stretch of road. The CB radio was my only company. Suddenly, it crackled to life with a desperate voice. "Help! This is Caleb. Someone's trying to kill me." The voice was frantic, filled with pure terror. I grabbed the radio and tried to respond, but the call had abruptly ended. My heart pounded in my chest. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I pulled over to the side of the road and contacted the authorities, providing them with Caleb's last known location. They assured me they would investigate, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Continuing my drive, I couldn't stop thinking about Caleb. Who was chasing him? What had happened? When I reached my next stop, I anxiously awaited news. Hours later, the police contacted me. They had found Caleb's truck abandoned on the side of the road, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I felt a deep unease that night, one that stayed with me long after I parked my truck. Over the next few days, I started asking around, talking to other truckers at rest stops and diners. To my horror, I discovered that Caleb's call wasn't unique. Several truckers had received similar distress calls over the years, each one eerily the same, and none of the missing truckers were ever found. The stories were always the same: a frantic voice on the radio, a desperate plea for help, and then silence. Each time, the truck was found abandoned, with no trace of the driver. The authorities had no leads, no clues, nothing to explain the disappearances. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling every time I drove through the Appalachian Mountains. The fog seemed thicker, the nights darker. The road that had once been a place of solitude and peace now felt ominous, as if something was watching from the shadows, waiting to strike. Every time my CB radio crackled to life, my heart skipped a beat, fearing I would hear another desperate plea for help. I've seen a lot in my years on the road, but this was different. This was something I couldn't explain, something that left me feeling helpless and afraid. Even now, whenever I drive through that area, I keep the radio off. I can't bear to hear another voice calling for help, knowing there's nothing I can do. The memory of Caleb's voice, filled with terror, haunts me. The unanswered questions, the missing truckers, the abandoned trucks, all of it lingers in my mind, a dark cloud that never fully dissipates.